everybody. I'm Pastor AJ Houseman, and welcome to Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday, a podcast to dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Well, welcome to episode 13 this week. Today, our guest is Pastor Laura Swanson, who is the associate pastor at St. Philip Lutheran Church in Roanoke, Virginia.
Hello.
Hello from the South. Is that Virginia's the South, right?
Oh yeah, we are, yeah. And Southwest Virginia is its own, Virginia's a fun state. So, but good, glad to be here.
I remember the first time that I met someone from Southwest Virginia in the Roanoke Valley. And they said, "Oh, I'm from Southern Virginia." And I was really confused. I was like, I thought there was only regular Virginia and West Virginia.
There is this third state, that somehow left off of the U.S. maps, Southwest Virginia. It kind of started Roanoke on down, and it's a fun place to be.
And that's like true, right? Like people that live in that area, like they don't want to associate with those people up by DC at all.
Oh yeah, like that. They don't even, it's a whole separate country. We don't talk about. And actually, fun fact, West Virginia did like a formal invitation to counties in Southwest Virginia to say, if you want to join our state, you are welcome here. So anyways, that is Southwest Virginia.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
There's some, I'm just trying to think about what the electoral map would look like if that happened.
Yeah, it is. Virginia would get bluer.
Well, yeah, for sure. All right. Anyways, well, it's good to have you. I'm really glad that you're here today. We're going to be talking about the New Testament reading for Sunday, July 4th, if you're planning on going to church on the 4th of July. And that reading is 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 2 to 10. So I'm going to read the NRSV because, again, I just copy and pasted it. I know a person in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that such a person, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows, was caught up into paradise and heard things that are not to be told, that no mortal is permitted to repeat. On behalf of such a one, I will boast. But on my own behalf, I will not boast, except of my weaknesses. But if I wish to boast, I will not be a fool, for I will be speaking the truth. But I refrain from it, so that no one may think better of me than what is seen in me or heard in me, even considering the exceptional character of the revelations. Therefore, to keep me from being too elated, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it would leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am content with weakness, insults, hardship, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. So this text is interesting, I think, to have specifically on July 4th, Sunday.
Yeah. So Pastor Laura picked out our text for today to talk about, and I think you're right. And so, also, I just want to say, for those that may not know, all progressive pastors hate the 4th of July being on a Sunday.
This is very true. I saw it on the calendar. I was like, oh, really? Like, it gives us a chance to talk about and address, that we are Christians first. Like our identity in Christ is more important than any other allegiance in our life.
Yeah.
And maybe most poignantly on July 4th.
Well, and I think the problem is people expect their pastor to address these secular holidays when they pop up on Sunday. Right. And so, the message that like this country was founded in the name of God and blah, 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 blah. And like,
and then all the pastors eye roll, hold the breath. Yeah. Then I think that we can give thanks for, give thanks for our country, but also acknowledge the problems, right? And think about how are we as Christians called to live in a country that is not perfect, and where does the gospel help us to understand how to love and care for our neighbor, and that, again, that identity should be more important than our patriotism.
Well, and to also understand that, like, trying to find the delicate words to say this, right? Like, Christianity is not like you're probably going to find better words than I will, because I'm just trying to be like sensitive. I don't know why I'm trying to be sensitive. Yeah. Like, being Christian should surpass, like you said, our patriotism, but also to recognize that they're not synonymous, right? Yes. That this, that this is not a Christian country, and that this country has done terrible things to people, both other religions and Christians alike. And that, to be patriotic in the United States and to be a good Christian are not the same thing.
Yeah. And it's, thinking back just generally through history, when religion and the state get too close, it just can be dangerous, right? And so I think that, it is an important Sunday for us to think about what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a Christian living in America, and how does how does the gospel then help us to live and love and serve in the midst of that? Yeah. And part of that, I think, is just for me, as I was looking over the text, just thinking that our identity as a baptized child of God, it comes before everything. And I think that's an easier way to come at it with people. Like, we're not trying to, because people may get deeply offended, right? Like, I love my country. I want to have the flag up and do all these things, but it's like, right, our relationship with God supersedes all of it. Right. And so just trying to center ourselves in that. But I think that this part of the reason I chose this text, I think it's very interesting. So Paul gets on this whole thing about like strength and weakness. And having a Sunday that is Independence Day, I think we might have this inclination to think about American strength and all of that. But this text calls us to maybe think a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Because like that's this concept of weakness is a struggle in our country. I mean, like, first of all, America likes to think that we're the best and strongest country in the world. And you're clearly unpatriotic or, should be hanged for treason if you don't believe that. Right. And that we must, boast our strength as Americans. And we find that that's totally contrary to our Christian teaching, right?
Yes. And I think that's, when Paul goes on a lot about weakness in the text, but he's talking about, not the weakness in that, I can't do something, but the weakness in that I can't do it all. I think that's, for me, as I was looking at that, Paul's saying that my faith, God is helping me to see here that if I'm going to boast, I need to boast in the fact that I need God, that we can't, we're not perfect. We can't do it on our own. And I think that is an important message to hear, especially in thinking about us as a country. Like, our country is not perfect. Our country can't function in the world just on its own, as we just lived through in a pandemic, right? We see that we're not an island. And so I think that is helpful for us to know, both in terms of our faith and our country, that we're not perfect, can't do it alone. And the faith helps us to know that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's back up just 1 second, a little bit for like our little background on this Paul's second letter to the Corinthians that we have here. Just a recap, because we've talked about this a little bit. This is actually Paul's fourth letter to the Corinthians, because they were problem children. And Paul is actually today addressing another problem child moment that they're having. So what's happening is there's like another rival group of missionaries that are trying to win over the church in Corinth, and preaching a little bit of a different message. And so it's starting to divide the church in Corinth, and starting to confuse them, right? And so in chapter 11, Paul paints these guys, this other group, as violent, arrogant, moralistic, and power hungry. And actually like condescendingly calls them super apostles.
I hope they have capes. That's what I think of every time I hear that.
Yeah. So Paul's speech and what he's trying to do is sort of, I think, kind of affirm the opposite of this violent, power hungry way of thinking, right? That our strength actually is in our weakness. And this is where Christ is at, and not in violence, and not in being power hungry and domineering, right? This is what Paul is trying to get this church to understand.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting for us now to look back and think of Paul, like if the only way you could communicate with a community is either through like physically getting over there or writing a letter, like that's hard, especially when there's so many problems happening. And Paul's like, oh, you people. And so, a lot of times his language in the letter.
Driving my chariot down there every time there's a problem.
Can't y'all just behave? But yeah, so I think that Paul uses this strong language. He's like, y'all got to get this, because I can't keep like riding the thing, coming through over the sea or whatever to get to y'all. And that, he like eventually like has a meeting there, in Corinth that doesn't go well, so he skips them on the way back. Like they've got a dramatic relationship, Paul and the people in Corinth. And so I just think that it's interesting for him, like just trying to write these letters, like, I'm not there, but listen, you got to listen to me. Like, I know that there's these other powerful groups here, but like we're centered in Jesus, and this is what we need to be about, and trying to do that. But starts that with like this really trippy experience where he talks about himself in the third person.
Yeah. I know this one guy. How many times
had this really weird experience?
Like, I have this friend that has this problem.
This friend
story that Paul is telling.
Caught up in went up to paradise and heard things that are not to be told, but then he tells about them.
Also to kind of explain here, so third heaven here doesn't suggest that there are different levels of heaven. The mindset of the day in the terminology is that like the blue sky is the first heaven, the starry sky is the second heaven, and then the place where God actually lives, up and above the dome is the third heaven. That's just a language thing. It's not suggesting there are multiple heavens,
multiple levels. No, that is helpful, and just shows like how powerful the experience was that Paul had. But then comes down and wants to boast about his weakness, though makes a point of saying that his the revelations had exceptional character, which I just thought was kind of fun.
So the weakness here, asthenia is the word for weakness, which is just wanting for strength. Weakness, and it's also gets translated as illness, suffering, or other calamities and maladies that might befall someone. And the root is sthen, which is the root of like the strength here, which is really just meaning to hold it all together, to be self-contained. So asthenia, that ass adding it to it, meaning just it's coming undone. Right? That you don't have it all together. That's just what this weakness here in the Greek means. Like, I don't have it all together, which may mean I'm sick, which may mean I've got some other maladies or infirmities, or it just may means like, I don't have it all together, right? Like
it's a very true statement for all of us. I feel like every day I can find some reason as to why I do not have it all together. Yeah.
I look
Yeah,
at
which is
people that like look like they have it all together, and I'm like, how? There's not enough hours in the day for me to have it all together.
yes, yes. And so that's, I love that verse, just my grace, that, you know, that God says, my grace is sufficient for you.
Yeah.
For my power is made perfect in weakness. So my, you know, my power is made perfect in this realization that you don't have it all together. Like that, yeah. You know,
And
it's
I say
perfect
that
as
some of
made perfect.
the best way that I've heard that explained is from Pastor Nadia Boltz-Weber, who says
Mm,
that like our shortcomings and our, you know, falls are fertile ground for God's redemptive
mm,
work.
yeah. That's
I think
great.
it's a great way to put that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But this text, and just in general, this concept of weakness or not having it all together is a particularly uncomfortable topic for Americans, right? Like that's part of our culture, right? That you have to have it all together, especially if you're male. You are not allowed to show weakness. If you're a woman,
Mm-hmm.
we just expect you to be weak, right? So like that's just
Mm-hmm.
it's just so you know, this thing about, you know, Christianity here is quite opposite of our American culture,
Yeah.
and you know, the foundings, the pull yourself up by your own bootstraps thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's important to lift up here, because I think, you know, we've made progress, not within the whole church, but I think some churches have made progress in terms of how we understand women and invite. I mean, like, right, we're pastors, right? We've made some progress here, but there also needs to be progress in terms of how we understand men and how we invite men to live out themselves. There's a good book on this. It's called "For the Love of Men" by Liz Plank. That's a total aside, but it's great to. She talks about a mindful masculinity, and so that. I think this text helps us to understand, and even just looking at, you know, Jesus, right? He cried, and he sometimes took great, like, you know, there were times where Jesus was like, "Hold on a second," and so that you don't have to be this like domineering, strong force all of the time. That it's, you know, you are displaying God's glory when you say, "Hold on a second, I don't have it all together," and that God gives you the freedom to do that, to be yourself, and to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is where I honestly think some of the biggest challenge, anybody out there who is attempting to raise a boy, attempting to raise a young man, like I think that's where the real challenge is. I guess maybe to me, I have no problem raising a strong woman, right? But when it comes to raising a good man, I think is harder. So from the beginning of like how we even do like pregnancy announcements in this country, either pink for a girl or blue for a boy, and the expectations on you are set from the day that you're born based on your genitals, right? That's how we do things in this country. It's not just us. I want to be clear about that. This is a pretty common thing. But so from a young age, right? Like boys are not allowed to show weakness. Boys are not allowed to cry. Boys are not allowed to express their emotions. That is somehow being weak, which is not masculine, right? When actually, you know, in a more nuanced and I think in a mature way to look at it is it takes a lot of strength to express your emotions and to show vulnerability.
Yes,
right?
that takes bravery, right? That there's strength and bravery in that maybe isn't celebrated in the same way. Like you said, like once you kind of like, oh, well, this is the sex of the child, so then, right, this is how we're going to condition them. But like, what a beautiful world to say, like, you are who you are, and that you're invited to be that fully, and that's how you live into faith. It's just to be you in whatever way that looks like. Yeah.
And so for more about the power of vulnerability, I want to send everyone to Brené Brown. That's where like her stuff's amazing. The Call to Courage and the Power of Vulnerability. That's, you know, the essence of the whole thing is that you have to be willing to be vulnerable to have strength, right? Like, and you know, we kind of get that in what Paul is saying here.
Yeah, when I was doing chaplaincy in seminary, I read was it The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. It was like my first intro to her, and yeah, she says the most powerful thing we can do is to own our story. And that's always stuck for me in terms of like, as you know, trying to live out my own story. But then I think here, looking at this, we dwell in our weakness, we boast in that. So to lean into the power of we are children of God, and that we don't have it all together, but God's grace comes to us, and that we lean more into that than our whether it's American capitalism, whatever, are this motivating force to say, well, I have it all together and I can do all the things and I'm strong and I can do it my own. That faith gives us an alternative to that there is a different story to hear and to live.
I say, so to share a little bit of my story in this idea of weakness and vulnerability. So I, as a young girl, like right away was like, with this mindset that like boys were strong and they just expected women to be weak and inferior, and that little girls couldn't do what little boys could do and weren't as strong and weren't as fast. I was like,
yeah.
Watch me.
I was going to say, you're a pretty strong person.
I from a very young age was like, listen, there is nothing that the boys can do that I cannot also do. Watch me. Watch me. And so and I am definitely a strong and fierce and independent woman, and I don't think no one that's ever met me would argue with that statement. But there is something that we do to young girls who are strong, who are independent, who do speak their mind, who do run fast, who are great at sports. Do you know what we call them?
Tomboys.
Call them tomboys. Which, for anybody who knows someone who's like this in your life, don't call them a tomboy. That is not a term of endearment. It's not cute. It is subtly demeaning that young girl that she is either too masculine or not feminine enough, purely because she is strong and independent.
And those seeds get planted so early. Like, I don't think we realize, like, I've even thought about that just in my position and working with children, and how do we speak to them, and how do we affirm them and not try and put them into a category or say like, oh, well, you're, a great leader and you're just, so like, we're not going to call you by a different gender just because we see these qualities in you, but anyone can have those. Yeah. I
got called that a lot as a kid, and never once did it feel good. Not once, that there was something wrong with me. Right. And then it feeds into little girls' identities, right? That there's something wrong with them, that they're not as good at being a girl as other girls. Like how, just the power of words, like the words that we speak to children have a lot of power. Yeah. And then on the flip side, boys who cry, boys who, maybe aren't into sports, maybe boys who from a young age didn't immediately think that they needed to go out and hunt their dinner because it's the 21st century. And baby boys that like dance or other things that we have labeled as feminine. All of a sudden they're sissies and they're weak, and we emasculate men in the same way that we do this to women and young girls. So that's my thing, is just to think about how we culturally talk to children about strength and weakness and vulnerability, because ultimately it is like, it's conditioned. Right? Our culture is how we condition our children. And let's see if we can change that, is how I feel about it.
Right. And I think that, like changing it. And I think that I know for myself, like, coming through seminary and doing, the work that you have to do and learning more about yourself, but you learn about the way you've been conditioned, right? That it's okay to speak your mind. You don't have to apologize for it, specifically for women. And I think that when you're having to unlearn those behaviors, you then start to realize what we're telling children, right? And that at least for myself, I became much more aware of, just how we, encourage girls to participate in things. When I'm sitting in a meeting and I'm the only woman there, I'm also like 40 years younger than everyone else there, right? This happens sometimes frequently. And so I think that you have to develop that confidence and how can we help instill that for both boys and girls, that your voice is valuable, but also you need to listen to the voices of others too.
Can I tell you something that gets my goat? And I know it gets yours because you've talked about it before too. Yeah. I am not particularly a stickler like that. Everyone needs to call me Pastor AJ all the time. But when I introduce myself to you as Pastor AJ, immediately turn to a male colleague and call them Father someone or Pastor Jim or something like that, and then turn back to me and say AJ. That's
Yep.
incredibly demeaning to women, right? That like you can
Yes.
recognize the title of a male but not of a female.
Yes. Yes. And I think that we had that
And
whole
people do that
reintroduction. Oh yeah. Well,
all
then
the
there was the
time.
whole Dr. Jill Biden. When have
Yeah.
we ever, like, there's a million officials in Washington, D.C., and we always say congressman, whatever, president, vice president. And then to not honor the title of the first lady, goodness. And so I think that it shows that we were just, none of us are immune to that. But oh yeah, like I remember when I serve a wonderful congregation, but we had to have conversation when I got there that like, I am Pastor Laura. Like I'm not Miss, I'm not a teacher, I'm not little whatever, like that I am your pastor, and that names matter, and the terms we use matter. And so when you saying pastor helps you to see me as your pastor. And so, if we need to honor the titles that people have if they invite us to do that.
Are you the first female pastor that they've had?
I'm not. I'm the second. So yeah, it is good not to be the first, but it is interesting. This is just a total aside, but you may have heard my like soapbox about this in seminary, that I hate the term like female pastor, woman pastor, lady. I hate it. Can't stand it. Let's be done with it. Because when we put it right, and then the same thing as if we said a male nurse. Like, well, then you're setting up this, and then like nurses have to be women, and the pastors have to be men. Like, nope. You're a pastor, you're a nurse, you're a teacher. We are grateful for you. And like, that's it. But yeah, so I think that just goes into like all of those understandings of strength and weakness. We need to like keep breaking down the barriers and the stereotypes that are there.
Right. The typical, like, this is a man's profession and this is a woman's profession thing. And like,
like, let it die.
And I don't think that really, I don't know. It's not really a thing in the 21st century anymore. Like there are still professions that typically, if you like tallied, the majority of people are still probably women, and some are still probably men. And we do serve in one of those professions, and that's only because some of our ecumenical partners, which is a fancy word for other Christian denominations, don't allow women to be pastors.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. That is, I think for me, I've talked about this before, but that like I started paying more attention to like Women's History Month and those leaders when I entered a male dominated profession, that those examples and those stories became so much more powerful to me when I was having to deal with my own like struggles of I don't, when people are like, oh, I'm Pastor Laura, and they're like, oh, you're a pastor, like getting that. And so it's helpful to hear those stories and that like other people have been here, just keep working through it.
And just, only speaking for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, but over the past several years now, has been lots more women than men.
Yes.
Being pumped out as pastors these days. So.
Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting to me, the older women who are in seminary, who when they were our age, like that wasn't an option. And so now they get that gift, and just, how brave and strong of them to keep following that call, even when they couldn't. Like that's amazing to me, because I feel like, I came about in a time where, it was, of course I still worked hard and had struggles, right? But that it was pretty easy for me to come into seminary.
No one immediately looked down on you for being a woman.
Right.
Yeah. We are lucky in that fashion. And to say that, like, even, once upon a time, women experienced that just going to college, right? That
It's come so far.
Yeah. Weakness and vulnerability and Paul definitely leads to some good conversations, as you can see. But understanding that our mindset of what weakness and strength are is very, very complex, and I think nuanced, based on cultural norms, right?
Yes.
And we're still learning to work through that.
Yeah. And I think that part of maybe the uncomfortable part of this text is that it pushes up against our natural assumptions. It pushes up against what we're conditioned to think as Americans. And so it invites us to maybe envision a different way that lives more fully as God intends.
Yeah. I love how that like Paul is basically trying to convince them not to follow these other missionaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that he does that is by saying, "Listen, I am weak." How
Mm-hmm.
often would that be? Like, I think about like political speeches, right? Or
Right.
elected officials. Like, how often do you hear someone get up there and talk about their weaknesses rather than their strengths, right?
Right.
Or their weaknesses as their strengths.
Mm. Yeah. You don't see that. That would be a very short-lived campaign. Pick
Yeah.
me. I'm weak.
And I wonder, like, if maybe we had more elected officials and stuff like that that could, talk about these things. What would leadership look like? How would that change the culture in our country?
Yeah. Well, and as we have more leaders who are not old, straight white men, we're starting to see a different definition of leadership that you could have, not that those men can't be empathetic and things like that, but maybe it's more displayed more fully in someone who's of a different demographic. And so that I think that is helpful for us to just see the definition, understanding of leadership broadened.
Yeah. Yeah, and it changes. It changes the entire culture of what it means to be a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is exactly what Paul is trying to get us to understand. That
Mm-hmm.
the leadership is not about how you can use violence to manipulate, or how you can, I
Mm-hmm.
to use a somewhat crude phrase, but the pissing contest, right? Like,
Yes, right, yes. But that's it. And that, like Paul saying, listen, like but God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. That is such even now is kind of an antithetical like message, but was then when you had the super apostles going around and we're given this power, this message of violence and power and taking things by force. And Paul's like, nope, like we boast in Christ, like we are weak, but we boast in Christ who makes us strong.
yeah.
And it's a very different message.
So if you're thinking about a 4th of
Mm-hmm.
July sermon, what
Mm.
would you want a pastor to say if they were going to preach about this on the 4th of July?
I think to be honest about our situation, I mean, like we've been through a lot as a country in the past 4 years, 1 year, take your time. But that you can speak to, celebrating July 4th, I think brings up the history of our country. It brings up maybe a narrative of our history that is one-sided, right? Lifting up more of the, these wonderful people came to this land and it was just open for no. And
this
so I
land
think
wasn't open. We didn't come to like a barren place. People already lived here and we took it.
And we killed them and diseased and all of these things. And so I think recognizing
and then we went to another place and we rounded up people, took them from their families, and then shipped them over here to build everything for us.
Right. And to work our fields. Yeah. So I think that we have to acknowledge that this Sunday brings up a lot of history, a lot of which is not helpful or maybe only told from one side. And so I think as I go to preach this and what I invite other people to think about is just what are the American narratives that we feel like are coming out really strongly, whether it's, this America first, or now we're getting like Build Back Better, we're hearing these things, but like, so it's very much American strength is the kind of the theme of July 4th. It's kind of the theme of our country that we like to put out there. So thinking about that and then thinking about the gospel and that, for my power is made perfect in weakness. So how do we live into power is made perfect in weakness in a society that so values strength? I think that is something to explore within your context that sometimes it's okay to be critical of our country. It's okay to do those things, to maybe do things that aren't considered strong, to live out the gospel, to love our neighbors well, to do those things. Maybe that doesn't match our traditional American story, and that's okay.
Yeah. I think about how, the body of Christ, right? So the collective of different gifts. And so I think one strength that, one place where we kind of fill each other's weaknesses and gaps is the fact that we have such a broad community. And I think that the fact of, that we do have multiple cultures, multiple languages, people from countless, ethnic backgrounds, that actually, is something that we can find strength in, that we each have our own pieces, that we don't have to be strong in everything, that we have other people that can, work together in that community.
Yeah, both for our country and as the body of Christ, that both are made better in diversity, and both are better when we recognize that not everyone looks or talks or acts or believes like us, but that we live into who God calls us to be more fully when we celebrate the diversity.
Yeah. And I think that there are definitely, when you start to get into some of the ideologies of Christian nationalism and white supremacy, that those things of having that diversity and stuff somehow makes us weaker, and I think that it's really good to understand that, that these are not weaknesses, that these are things that give us strength to have diversity.
Right. And then coming back, mentioning Christian nationalism, that is just, it is disheartening how pervasive that is within the American church culture. And so figuring out how to address that, and, that our allegiance to Christ comes first, and that our identity is grounded in that. And then that leads us to an appreciation of diversity and pushing for, just not a Christian nationalist America.
Where we can. Yeah. And so again, that understanding that like, this is not a Christian nation.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people still don't necessarily understand that.
Yeah. Or that most of our founding fathers were not actually Christians.
Oh, exactly.
There's a lot of, I think that's when I think of July 4th on a Sunday, that there's just, it brings up so much story and myth that it's too much to just unpack all of that in a sermon, but there is so much to wrestle with in terms of, this long-standing understanding of like, oh, well, but we're just this Christian nation. And we're not, there's a lot to unpack there.
No, yeah, that a lot of those guys weren't Christian. And also I think about like, one who I identified as Christian, like Thomas Jefferson, he just cut parts out of the Bible he didn't like literally took a razor blade and cut out of his Bible that he disagreed with.
Imagine if we all did that.
Oh, right.
Right. Yeah. But that is, so I think that sometimes over the course of history, we can glorify things that shouldn't be. And I think this text helps us to think through that. Are we calling strength and giving glory to things that are super apostles that maybe we shouldn't be, when Christ is calling us to understand our weakness a little bit, but not a weakness into, like, I always get nervous, especially as a woman, speaking about weakness in church, like that it is not that like just the women are just to be submissive, or that like this is a communal understanding that we don't have it all together, not just specifically one group.
Yeah. We don't have it all together. And I want to say that again, and just like for people to know, like, it's okay to say, I don't have it all together.
Yeah.
We don't have it all together.
Yeah. I think that if there is one, the pandemic time has been horrific, but I will say, if I can, for myself, think of one positive change I think that's come out of it, is there is a little bit more space and understanding to be like, I don't have it together this week. Like, it's been hard. It's been like a hard mental health week. It's been hard, whatever. But there is at least I've noticed within my circles, a little bit more of an acceptance of talking about like, I really don't have it all together. I mean, we were all just pushed to such extremes and like difficult situations that I think people are a little bit more willing to admit like, no, I don't have it together. But as we like start like giving full steam ahead, going back to some sort of normal, I'll put that in quotes, that we don't want to move back to this, oh, I have it all together, everything's great. Like, no, it's okay to say, we didn't have it together. It's okay.
Ask the Naya, everybody. Ask the Naya. Yeah. It's okay to not have it all together.
Yes.
That's the word of the Lord.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us this week, and thanks for this great conversation that we're having here. And hopefully, someone gets a nice little nugget of something that they can use. But anyways, look for us next week on Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday. And you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday. And subscribe wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. And hopefully you'll hear us soon. Take care.